So here in Connecticut in the beginning of August, it's basically prime harvest season for the garden. So we're going to go out to the garden today. We are going to harvest some vegetables that are ready to harvest. And I'm also going to share with you some other things that may not be ready to harvest, but that we've been harvesting kind of this time of year as the season's going on. So as we head into the garden, you can see that it's definitely turning into a pretty crazy jungle in here, which I honestly love, but it is a little unruly. So I think my favorite spot in the garden right now, this time of year, is the bean tunnel. As you can see, it's just completely covered with beans. It's just beautiful, and something about plants growing up on a trellis is just, I know I've said it before, but I think it's really magical, and I just really like the environment that this creates in my garden. You can see lots of beans here ready to harvest. These are the Vortex green beans. You can see these beans are really long and rounded. And then on the other side of the trellis, we've got rattlesnake beans. You can see that these are a little more flattened, and both types of beans are delicious. So as tempting as it is, because I see so many things in the garden that I really want to show you guys, I'm not going to do a full garden tour today. Today's really just going to be about the harvest, about what types of vegetables we are harvesting right now, and we will go ahead and harvest a few today. So I have actually been harvesting beans. We've been harvesting beans almost every day, and when we do miss a day, you can really tell, because then we have an overabundance of beans the next day. And so when you're growing something like beans, you want to make sure to harvest regularly. Even if you don't actually need beans at the moment, you still want to harvest everything that's ready, because a plant like this will produce more the more you harvest. And so by harvesting beans, even like, for example, I have a lot of beans in my refrigerator right now. I don't actually need to harvest beans, but I am going to go out here and I'm going to go ahead and harvest these beans anyway, because I don't want them to get overgrown and too tough, and I want this plant to keep producing more beans for me. So I can always freeze the extra beans, or just refrigerate them for a little while, or give them away. Either way, you definitely want to make sure to harvest all of them though, because that means you get a bigger harvest overall. So I want to make sure to harvest not only these beans, which look perfect and tender, but to also harvest the beans like this. You can see this one is a little bit overgrown. This one's probably going to be a little bit tough, but I want to harvest it anyway, because if I let this bean fully develop, it's going to tell the plant that its job is done, it's made viable seeds for the next generation, and then it's going to stop producing as many beans. So even if there is a bean or a vegetable that is kind of overripe, I generally do, like I said, go ahead and harvest it, unless I'm trying to save seeds from it. Now, probably towards the end of the bean season, I will let some of these seeds or some of these beans fully mature so that I can have seeds for next year. But I don't want to do that until I'm pretty much done harvesting, because otherwise I will be robbing myself of potential future harvest. So I can either just compost this bean, or what you can do is you can split it open and find the bean seeds inside. Those should still be tender. You can eat those. So we're going to go ahead and finish harvesting this bean tunnel. Here's today's harvest of whole beans, and you can see not bad, especially considering that I just harvested whole beans a couple days ago. We've been harvesting either every day or every couple days for a few weeks now, and been getting lots of beans. Actually, right now, I see a couple overgrown beans that I missed, so I'm going to go ahead and grab those, and then we'll move on and harvest some other things in the garden. Now, my tomato plants are certainly not looking the healthiest. I honestly have not been keeping up with pruning the way I should, and so a lot of this disease is honestly my own fault. Despite that though, my tomato plants have been pretty forgiving of me and are still yielding quite a few tomatoes. So we're going to go through and we're going to harvest all the tomatoes that are ripe. I'm also going to harvest all the large tomatoes that are really close to ripe, because we are supposed to get quite a bit of rain this afternoon, and I find that it is better to harvest tomatoes as long as they're ripe or fairly close to ripe. You want to harvest before a big rain rather than waiting till after, for a couple reasons. One is that when you get a really big rain, it tends to make your tomatoes split. They take up water, they just absorb water faster than the skins can stretch, and that can often lead to the skins bursting, which really diminishes the shelf life of your tomatoes, makes them not quite as appetizing. So that's one reason. The other is that When they take up a lot of water really quickly like that, it does also dilute the flavor. Your tomatoes can taste a little bit watery rather than having that really full, rich tomato flavor that is so good. So I want to go ahead and harvest these this morning before we get all that rain this afternoon. Now, for the most part, I do prefer to let my tomatoes ripen on the vine. I think it does give them the best flavor. I mean, as you can see, these are pretty close though. So I think these are good enough that if I bring them in, they sit on the counter for a day or two, they'll still have lots of flavor. So you can technically pick your tomatoes as soon as they start to blush, as soon as they start to turn from green and show the first signs of their ripe color. You can pick them and they will continue ripening on the counter. A lot of people prefer to do that because it does mean that there is less risk of bug damage or anything happening to them before you get to harvest them. I prefer to, as I said, for the most part, let mine ripen as much as possible on the vine because I think you do get a better flavor that way. But we will not be getting a better flavor if we get lots of rain this afternoon and these tomatoes get all watered down. So these are close enough that I'm going to go ahead and harvest them. So I'm going to go ahead and harvest a couple of these beautiful pineapple tomatoes. This one doesn't want to come off the vine. You can see these are this beautiful golden orange color, and when you cut into them they have red streaks inside. These are really delicious. We've been really happy with these, so I'm going to go ahead and harvest what we have of these. This tomato here, sometimes you'll get this, especially with heirloom tomatoes. You can see they kind of ripen unevenly. Most likely what happened here is that this was actually two tomatoes, basically came from two separate blossoms that were fused together, and so it produced, I know this one's tiny, but sometimes this will happen with big, huge tomatoes too. And most likely, see this tomato, or this part is completely ripe, this part's green. If I waited for this green part to be fully ripe, most likely this part would start to rot. So we're just going to use this how it is and probably cut out the green part. So sometimes I do like to pull those fasciated blossoms off the plant to avoid this uneven ripening, but I do sometimes miss a few. So I don't think I have any zucchinis ready, but we're going to go in and check. I do see here, this looks like the very beginnings of powdery mildew, so that's not good. But let's see if we have any. I see a couple zucchinis in there, but I think they need a couple more days. But we'll have to check back on that tomorrow. Zucchini and summer squash in general is one of those vegetables that can grow really fast once it gets going. Sometimes it seems like it kind of takes forever to really get your first fruit set, but once you actually have zucchini fruits forming on there, they're going to grow to maturity in just a couple days. So I've got those two mini zucchinis on the plant that you saw. Those will probably be ready within the next couple days. So I'm going to keep checking on them every day just to make sure they don't get overgrown. But it looks like, at least from these plants, we don't have any zucchini to harvest today, so we're going to move on to cucumbers. So I've been harvesting probably a couple cucumbers pretty much every day. This is a pickling cucumber. Ideally, this probably would have been harvested yesterday. It's a little bit round, but it should still be nice and sweet. Over here, you can see there's another pickler. Sometimes they grow on the ground like this and sort of hide, and it's easy for them to, just a little dirt on that one. It's easy for them to get overgrown. I think that these two will be okay. If I'd let them go another day or so, they probably would have been too overripe, but we'll add this. We'll add that to our little bowl there. Now over here, I've got a silver slicer. This looks pretty much perfect, so we're gonna go ahead and harvest this one too. So I think 3 cucumbers today. Seems like a decent harvest. So I think the rest of the big slicer tomatoes will be able to go a couple more days. So I'm going to leave those on the vine. I like to basically store my produce on the vine as long as I can without having to worry about it getting overgrown or going bad, because I find that it generally stores better, it keeps quality better, as long as I said, you don't let it go too long. So the rest of my slicers, I think, can stay on the vine a couple more days. I'm going to let those be, but we're going to head over to the cherry tomatoes and see what we've got there for harvest. Looks like we've got a fair amount of cherry tomatoes that we can harvest. I did actually harvest a bowl of these yesterday because I needed them for something I was making, but I think we'll still have a reasonable amount that we can harvest today. Many times that I like to have a big variety of cherry tomatoes, so I just want to show you a couple of the kinds I have. These are black cherry. These aren't ripe yet. I find that this type takes a little bit longer to ripen than some of the others. Over in here, I've got Sun Gold. This is actually Sun Gold Select, which is the open pollinated version of Sun Gold. Got a handful of those. For here, I've got these little small red tomatoes. This is Matt's Wild Cherry. I find with harvesting these, they tear really easily when I harvest them, so I like to keep the little bit of leaves attached. These are small and delicious. So in here, I've got some Berry's Crazy Cherry tomatoes. You can see these are kind of a creamy yellow color. These are they have a really mild, sweet flavor, so these really add just a nice contrast. So I'll definitely make sure to do a more thorough and complete tomato review, including cherry tomatoes, at the end of the growing season for you guys, so I can just let you know which tomatoes did really well for me, which ones I'll grow again, and which ones I won't. So we'll get to that at the end of the season, but for now I just want to show you guys a little bit of the varieties that we have. So here's this bright orange Sun Gold, which is really delicious. Over here you can see I have another variety of red cherry tomato. These are a little bit larger than the Matt's Wild Cherry. This is Red Centiflor. This one's a really high yielding tomato. So even though they're both red, it's still variety because the size is different and the flavor is different. So I do think it's worth having both types of red cherry tomatoes, at least for me. And here you can see, this is a new tomato to me. This is Rosella, which is kind of similar in color to the black cherry. It's a little bit smaller. We've really been liking this one this year. So some of these herbs, these medicinal herbs that I've been growing, are kind of winding down, but they're still going to give us a little bit of a harvest. So this is calendula. I like to harvest these when they first open. Now this is not fully open, but you can see today will be the day it fully opens. You can feel it's a little bit sticky with the resin. That's the medicinal part. So because a lot of these herbs are so delicate and could be crushed by all the heavy vegetables I'm harvesting, I usually bring out a little separate bowl just to put those in. And then the chamomile, like the calendula, is winding down, but I like to harvest these also. I like to harvest them the first day that they're fully open. And these both have really great medicinal properties. So we finished up in the side yard garden. I got this beautiful bowl, and I forgot to show you guys harvesting this, but this is my first Lesia pepper. There actually are a few more peppers in the main garden I think I'm gonna go back and get. So I'll just show you a little clip of those at the end. But we got this beautiful bowl, plus just a few medicinal herbs today. We're over in the side yard garden here, and I know there's more stuff to harvest here. I know I've got some tomatoes. I know I've definitely got some more medicinal herbs. I've got some calendula and some chamomile that need to be harvested. I think I've got a couple cherry tomatoes, and I'm gonna check for beans also. I do have some bush beans growing over here. I did just harvest those a couple days ago, but as I said, beans do need to be harvested pretty regularly. So I'm just gonna do a quick harvest over here, and then we're gonna go harvest the deck. So that's the thing with a small yard, is you put your gardens where you can fit them, and you've got stuff all over the place. And over here in my Wisconsin 55 plant, I've got this one really crazy, gnarly looking tomato. This is definitely from a fasciated blossom. This is probably at least 3 tomatoes kind of fused together. So I'm not sure how usable this will be, but we'll cut out, there's at least a few chunks here that we can get some good meat off of. So in here, I've got a couple tomatoes that are ready. These are Azoychka tomatoes. They're kind of a yellowish Russian heirloom. These are really good. I've harvested a few of these so far. Got a couple more back here to grab before the rain. So up here on my deck, we have yet another area to harvest. So up here, I'm expecting that we'll get quite a few cherry tomatoes. I've got some jalapenos I want to harvest and lots of basil. See, I've got a lot of the same cherry tomato varieties up here. These are the Berry's Crazy Cherry, and right next to it, I've got a lot of these Matt's Wild Cherry tomatoes as well. Got lots more Azoychka tomatoes here that need to be harvested also. One other tomato that I have on the deck that I don't have in the garden is the spoon tomato. You can see how tiny those little cherry tomatoes are. They're really delicious and flavorful though. This plant just makes fun. You can see through here, it's just sprawling all through my other plants. But it makes these tiny little red cherry tomatoes. These are so delicious. I've also got to harvest jalapenos from the deck, which are all buried in this wild jungle here. So we're gonna have to dig through, you can see some peppers there. We're gonna have to dig through all this and find all the jalapenos. So the one other thing I need to make sure to harvest from my deck is this basil. You can see here that some of this basil is really starting to go to flower, and I want to harvest it before it actually starts to bloom, because once basil flowers, that changes the flavor of the basil, and it also means it's not going to produce as many leaves. So we want to stop that from happening and push it off as long as possible. Also, I have a lot of basil on my deck. It's growing really wild. There's more than we really need right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to harvest as much of this basil as I can, and then I'm going to preserve it by freezing it for winter. So I did post a video last year about, in that video I used parsley, about my favorite way to freeze and preserve herbs for winter. I'll go ahead and link that below. It's an old video, so bear with me during that video. But I'm going to do basically that same technique with this basil, and that will make sure that we have lots of fresh basil all winter long. So when I'm harvesting basil, any herb that I want to keep regrowing, what I'm going to look for is a joint here. You can see down here, well, I'll show you up here. You can probably actually see this one better. You can see we've got the main stem here, and then there's these two side stems coming off of it. I'm going to want to pinch it on the main joint in between those two side stems. And what will happen is that each of those side stems then becomes a main branch, leading to a bushier plant overall. Because I want to harvest quite a bit of this basil, I'm actually going to go down to the next joint down there, because I want to harvest as much of this as I can. One other thing that you can do if you harvest basil like this, as long as the stem hasn't turned woody yet, you can take this stem and stick it in a glass of water, and it will end up growing roots. Then you can plant it, and you've gotten a whole new basil plant. Now, if I was going to do that with this basil here, what I would do is cut off one of the side shoots, because these are more tender, and as you can see, the main stalk is starting to flower. So I may end up cutting these side shoots down here and trying to root them, and then putting them in a pot to get even more basil. Now in this pot here, you can see I have some other varieties of basil, but we're gonna harvest these just the same way that we did the regular basil. Now this is a mammoth or lettuce leaf basil. You can see how huge it is and how far these leaves will go. So this will be really good. Now here, this one is a spicy bush basil. You can see that the leaves are quite a bit smaller on this one. This one has a little bit of a sharper flavor. It's not as much of a sweet basil. I really like to grow a variety and have lots of flavors. So when I freeze these basils, I'm just going to combine all the different types together, which is going to give me a really good, well-rounded flavor for all my winter meals. So I harvested this nice big bowl of basil. This will make a lot of delicious frozen basil for us to have over the winter. And honestly, I harvested such a small percentage of the basil on the deck. We'll still have tons of basil left over for summer. So there is one more type of basil that I didn't mention. I'm actually going to grab the camera and move it a little closer so that you can see it better. So this type of basil is what's called holy basil, or sometimes called tulsi, and this is a medicinal herb. I don't actually use this for cooking. What I want to do is harvest this and dry it for tea over the winter. So we're gonna go ahead and harvest a bunch of this as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and harvest this the same way. I'm probably going to be a little bit more aggressive with harvesting it because I'm not going to need to use it in the meantime. I just want to harvest as much as possible and hopefully get some regrowth so we can get a second harvest this fall. So thank you so much for hanging out with me in the garden today while we harvested all this delicious food. I'm so excited to bring this into the house and enjoy it. I hope that you are having a great day. I hope that your gardens are abundant and yielding delicious food for you just like mine is. I can't wait to see you soon, so I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you next time.